A very good day to you. I'm Howard Feldman. This is the Synthesis Podcast, where every now and then we chat to interesting people. Today, joining us is Richard Sutton. He's an advisor on the stress management and adaptability to industry leaders, top athletes, and Olympic teams. He is well known as an expert. He's written a series of books. And today, we're going to be talking about Stress Proof, the game plan, which is his latest release. Richard is very well known on the speaking circuit, advises, as I've mentioned, top athletes around the world, as well as businesses. Richard, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Sure. So a while back, before the world went mad with COVID, you and I would often talk about the stress that people are under. I think you referred to it in your book, how as a kid, if you wanted to go and see a lion, you'd go to the zoo or the game reserve. Now everything's happening online, 3D. It's really, we're living in a world that's incredibly stimulating and very, very worrying. On top of that, COVID has arrived. It's really potentially a recipe for disaster. Take us through what was, what is, and then we can look at some of the methodology that you speak about in order to manage this.
So I think in our ancestral past, it's fair to say that we've gone through many challenges and many trials. And if one has to look back 50 years, 100 years, we would kind of reflect on that period and identify the fact that the stresses were very short-lived. They're over a relatively short period of time within the context of weeks or months, and they could be potentially intense or sometimes not that intense, but there was something sporadic about the type of stress and the type of experiences that we were going through in ancestral times and in historic times. And what we've seen now is a radical shift within the context of, as you've mentioned, now there's this fourth industrial revolution, which has created this exponentiality of things where everything is moving so quickly, so rapidly. All industries, everything in our lives has been affected, sometimes positively and most times adversely in a way that we're really grappling with. And the cumulative effect of all these exponential changes has triggered in us a primitive reflex, a reflex that is fundamentally designed for our survival and assists us in overcoming adversity and challenges. And it's great when it's activated spontaneously, but when we're activating the stress axis, which is this survival reflex on an ongoing basis through all this exponential change and all the challenges, it becomes a system that's very destructive. So the system that used to protect us is now becoming a system that harms us. And it is very much amplified by the COVID pandemic. So everything was kind of, the stage was set, so to speak. And when I said the stage was set for increased stress and challenges on the mental health front and all other areas, in 2019, there was a Gallup poll, and it involved 150,000 individuals from about 140 odd countries looking at what the average person experiences on any given day within the context of emotional states. And what they found was that at least a third of the world's population experiencing worry, anxiety, and stress. And this was pre-COVID. So everything has really become so intensified and amplified that it is really challenging every ounce of our coping abilities.
What happens to us? I mean, we know that stress affects us, and it affects all of us differently. I might put on weight. Somebody else might suffer from high blood pressure. We all react differently to stress, but that really is a physiological reaction within our own system, isn't it?
Very much so. So there is this genetic element that we all possess. Certain genes, we have polymorphism that might exist within certain individuals where stress responses might become much more amplified. So we have this exaggerated stress response where there's copious amounts of stress hormones being released in response to adversity or external threats. At the same time, some individuals on a genetic level struggle to shut down the stress axes, where there's just this failure to regulate. And we know many of us experience some of these symptoms. And so there is a genetic component, but what's really central at this point in time, and I think what is really kind of front and center is the fact that even if we don't have these inabilities to cope with stress from a genetic perspective, the amounts of stress that we're exposed to through all these exponential changes that have taken place and a whole reality that shifted is beyond anyone's tolerance. So we have this flood of stress hormones, which, as I mentioned on many occasions, offers us advantages in overcoming adversity and adapting. But this flood of hormones recalibrates our entire biological state and even impacts our brain very negatively when suspended over a protracted period of time. So I think there are individuals who certainly grapple a lot more with the challenges of our time, and there are individuals that are not grappling as much, but I don't think anyone's immune, exempt, or removed from the circumstances that we will experience.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to somebody yesterday, and she said to me, she happens to be a psychologist, and she said she's really managed 2020 well, but 2021 started and she's gone off a cliff because she just couldn't keep it there anymore. And I think to a greater or lesser extent, we all are grappling with it, and certainly we see it within our workspace where people are dealing with all sorts of things, and everything is amplified at a time like this.
Exactly. And I think, if you look at the fundamental drivers of stress at this point in time, we've got employment insecurity, we've got growing inequality, we've got social isolation. We've got 1/4 of the South African population is living alone, not by choice. We've got health insecurity that it's just something that's unprecedented. We had this incredible growth in terms of human health and well-being, and it's overnight turned on its head, and health insecurity is ever present, and it's not within the context of necessarily chronic diseases, but mental health is where the health insecurity lies over and above COVID. We've got skills instability. A lot of the skills that we possess today are not going to be sufficient in 2 years' time. We've got, the list will go on, and this is driving a sense of kind of insecurity and a lack of support and high demands and long working hours. And we're trying to do everything we can in order to try and control these variables that are in many respects uncontrollable.
So is the answer then we're going to go through some of your techniques, but the reality is, and I guess the first step is just recognizing what stress does to us, and then secondly, the amount of stress that we actually are under.
I think that is the starting point, is to identify, has the stress affected us on an emotional level, on a physical level, on a cognitive level, and it affects all of us to some degree, and no one's exempt. Whether some of us are experiencing digestive issues at this particular period or point of time, or some of us are poorly, we just don't have motivation and we just don't have emotional stability. Some of us are just not thinking as clearly as we have in the past. It is some impact, and it's really important to understand on what level it's impacted us. Is it this physical, emotional, or cognitive? But at the same time, you can't remedy or you can't fix what you don't understand. So we have to understand, what is it that's driving this state? We need to reflect on how it's affecting us, but at the same time, what is it that's causing us? And through that identification, we're able to become, I guess, a subject that has a control on his path and over his destiny, as opposed to an object that is acted upon by forces that are beyond our control.
So what are some of the steps? What are some of the ways in which we can learn to control some of the things we can control, but let go of those that we can't?
So I think that there's two messages here, and I think that there is this reality, is that we there's so much beyond our control, and we can reflect on it, and we can look back and try and understand why and how we arrived at this point, and that only leads to resentment and anger and bitterness, and really doesn't take us anywhere. Or we can acknowledge that the circumstances are beyond our control in many respects, but what we do have control over is direct the path and rather look forward. The second step is really to say that in order to navigate this time where so little is in my control, I've got to control the controllables. And the controllables really is, how do you feel, how do you think, and how are you acting? And self-care is probably one of the most important things, because as a group, as a society, as a community, we have this responsibility to others, upliftment of others, support of others in this difficult time. But we can only achieve that if we ourselves have looked after ourselves adequately or appropriately to combat some of the challenges that we're going through. So in order to do that, one has to be quite strategic. No longer can one just be tactical about it. You can't say, well, I'm not feeling great and I'm going to exercise a little bit more and I'm going to take nutritional supplements. One has to look at it quite strategically and say that we're going to be in this position or this situation over a protracted or extended period of time. This is the strategy I'm going to have to employ in order to manage and cope and overcome the adverse. And now that, as a plan, that strategy it has 4 fundamental parts to it. And those 4 parts typically involve shifting one's mindset. So the first place one really starts is the way one thinks about things. If we see the challenges of our time as an opportunity to develop ourselves, grow, we understand that it's difficult. We're not diminishing the impact it's having on ourselves and people around us, but we do understand that these type of scenarios and these type of things often are catalysts for immeasurable growth on a personal level, on a professional level, and even on a spiritual level. So we have to really our starting position is fundamentally change our mindset, understand that the circumstances that we're going through and the stress response that we have can often work to our advantage, maybe not now, but certainly in the future. The second really kind of strategic point is connection, and what we're tending to find now, and I think everyone can identify with this, is the fact that we're becoming more and more insular. So we have these vehicles of connection with Zoom and Microsoft Teams and WhatsApp and all these social media opportunities, but we're not really connecting properly anymore. We became more and more insular, just kind of sticking to our families and our very tight circle of friends. And the more we connect and the more we interact with others, actually the greater the protection from stress there is on a hormonal level, a molecular level. It's not even just from a support perspective. So that's the second part of the strategy, is break the cycle and really reach out and connect and express your vulnerabilities in order to create hormonal shift. The third part of really this management model centers around being able to control the stress axes. And we talked about some people have this genetic inability to regulate their stress responses, too great a stress response, or can't shut down appropriately. But the interesting thing is the body has a fail-safe. It has a system that is able to shut down stress literally at will. You have this gift that is built into us. And if we stimulate that system within 30 seconds to 60 seconds, we have this total reorganization of our biological states. And that really kind of centers around activities that stimulate a nerve system known as the vagus nerve. And if we engage in meditation and yoga and deep breathing exercises and swimming and massage and reflexology and all these alternate therapies, which are fundamentally vagal stimulators, we can really transform our reality by controlling stress and just keeping it on a leash. And then the fourth part of the strategy, and kind of where I'm landing on the just this part of the conversation, is really about the strategies that keep us strong in this time. What stress tends to do is it alters our chemical machinery, so to speak, where we produce less molecules that support our emotional stability. We produce a lower quantity or no effectiveness there's reduced effectiveness of molecules that create cognitive integrity and adaptability. And it's really important to choose activities, exercise and diet and environmental awareness that really supports our neurochemistry. And it's the basics. It's the regular exercise, and it's the good nutrition, staying away from the things that evoke the immune system, and it's taking certain nutritional supplements, multivitamins and omega-3 fatty acids that really kind of just create that overall infrastructure. So if we put this entire plan together, we create an opportunity to leverage off good health in that we can change our community, support our family, support our friends, support our colleagues, and so on.
So what we've noticed, certainly in a business environment, is and we do constant surveys, and what we see is that people are stressed, even though they've got job security, they in a fortunate environment, but things like unable to switch off at night, or because we're now, instead of, as somebody said, instead of bringing work home with you, we're now living at work. Things like not exercising enough. We find that people are on these Zoom meetings or team meetings from the time they start to the time they finish. So we're trying to get people to walk away from their computers during lunch, have lunch away from your computer, go and exercise. But it feels very hard to do these things.
It does. It does. And also, as you mentioned, I mean, I think one of the last kind of surveys I saw was that most people are working 2 to 3 hours longer. Those who are still employed and have a certain degree of job stability are working considerably longer. And also, we have all these connection vehicles that are very draining in terms of productivity. And you think that technology would augment productivity and we get more efficient through technology. And what we're seeing, in fact, is not a recent trend. It's a trend over the last 50 years, is that productivity is declining in most of the developed countries. And in most of the developing countries, it's actually declining. And there's a lot of factors for this decline in labor productivity or total factor productivity. And some of them relate to hyperconnectedness, like you've just mentioned now. One has to understand that when one's interrupted, it creates this tendency or this propensity towards making errors. It shifts you away from your thinking. In fact, if you interrupted for 4 seconds or longer, it increases the risk of making a mistake by 300%. So now we've just added additional time onto the day. At the same time, when we're interrupted by meetings and calls and emails, it does increase our stress responses, increase our frustration, time pressure, and overall effort. When we get back to an activity, in fact, it takes us about 23 minutes after a significant interruption to return to the original activity at the degree that we left it. And this is kind of just the technology elements. We also have, what we're seeing is organizational culture has shifted really rapidly. So we're seeing more bureaucracy and longer email chains, and we've got conference calls. Some of them are needless, and we've got unnecessary meetings and dysfunctional meeting behavior and meetings without clear agendas and extended meetings. And fundamentally, this really kind of drives chronic stress in many respects, and it creates declines in productivity. And these are things that we're all grappling with. And what we've seen is a counter to this lower productivity and this hypervigilance and people trying to stay abreast of the circumstance we're confronted with and stay relevant going forward is the emergence of the high performance culture. So a lot of businesses are already kind of create this platform where we are high performance and we are going to kind of live, eat, and breathe the high demands and the long working hours, and even if it's at the expense of family and work conflict. And we understand that this is a big drain in terms of well-being and health. And in fact, it increases mental health risk by 60% and physical health by 50%, if I remember correctly, and chronic disease risk by 52%. But the big factor is burnout and not being able to shut down. And this is creating exhaustion and fragility and physical strain and everything that goes along with it. And we really have to stop, pause, and recalibrate and kind of relook at things and say, well, we're in this movie, and we are all trying to create more innovation and more creativity and more productivity. How are we going to go about it without destroying our people in the process? And in these uncertain times where we don't even know where we're positioned. And that kind of really talks to what is a business.
So I guess what you're saying is almost to be more ruthless around meetings that you attend, who attends, preparation of those meetings, because the way in which it's kind of developed is because these technologically based meetings have become so easy just to set up, and it's one click and you're in. We've almost become a little bit too lazy or complacent, and almost promiscuous actually around it. We need to be a lot more discerning around the meetings that we attend and the preparation thereof.
So this is a big position that companies like Bain and company are taking, consultancy firms like Bain and company are taking with regard to trying to augment productivity. So what they've identified is that the average kind of leader manager in an organization at the moment is spending about 2 days a week in meetings. Which is kind of not allowing him to fulfill his roles within the rest of the organization. And if you look at what is a business is a group of individuals with unique skills and talent, the amount of time that these individuals are able to dedicate to the organization. And fundamentally, if we take these individuals and we create an environment where they can access their skills and talents more effectively, and they can dedicate more time to professional responsibilities, everything just explodes and everything kind of sprouts from that point. And that's really talking to how do we go about this? How do we create an ecosystem that supports bringing out the best of your people? And there's a couple of things that one can do. And I think kind of minimizing stress is really important, essential to that, because healthier employees can access the skills and talents more effectively and dedicate so much more time to the organization. But so the first, I guess the first step in terms of augmenting productivity is really kind of promoting health. And the second step is providing an enabling environment. So you want good, stable infrastructure, and you want strong technology adoption. I think a lot of people are doing that. But at the same time, you want to be encouraging an innovative ecosystem. And the innovative ecosystem will support and really facilitate dynamism and creativity. And these are factors that are really going to determine success going forward. And then on the back of that, so we've got the health, the enabling environments, innovative ecosystem. And then on top of it, you want people like with the highest degree of skills and highest degree of training. So by doing this and by supporting your teams in these type of areas, what you're looking for is greater competency, greater self-esteem, removes job insecurity, and you're just putting this incredible model together. But really, in terms of productivity drains, so dysfunctional meeting behavior and excessive meetings and bureaucracy, these are all kind of things that are at the forefront.
We don't have a lot of time. We have around about 5 more minutes, but I do want to talk to you about your latest book. Take us through the process, take us through what you wanted to and I believe have achieved in this in the writing of this book.
So the first book was really centered around self-management and self-care in crisis. That was the stress code, and it was a deep dive into how to get through challenges successfully from a health and emotional, physical perspective. The second book is really about leadership in crisis and how we need to act and behave and how we need to protect those that fall within our sphere of influence. So the big feature here is in the second book is saying that this is how stress is affecting your teams, your family, your friends, your colleagues. This is why they're all being affected at this point in time, at this point in history. And then it goes into these are the consequences from a social perspective of inaction. And then finally it lands on this is what we need to do. This is how we got to step into this role at this particular point in time in order to change the narrative and change the landscape.
And how was it to write? Because the process is quite grueling.
It was a lot of research. There was a couple of wrestling matches in my mind, many days. It was quite tough, but very, very rewarding. As you've written a couple of books, and you know what the experience is like, and the kind of the whole journey. And so I was very fortunate in this particular instance where I was able to get the book out within a year, so it became much more relevant. There's this central theme around COVID, and it was largely because of the restructuring of work in the COVID period. Most of my work was speaking engagements and interpersonal engagements with leadership teams and broader teams, and obviously that stopped abruptly, and it gave me this opportunity to really throw myself into putting this book out full time, which was we see advantage in challenges or opportunity and challenges, and this was one of them. But absolutely rewarding and an incredible experience.
I really would urge you, if you haven't already got hold of the book, to do so. It is called Stress Proof: The Game Plan by Richard Sutton, and it is well worth going to get. Is it available pretty much everywhere, Richard?
Pretty much everywhere. Pan Macmillan's pretty good at putting it up.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely amazing. It's absolutely critical conversations that we need to be having. We need to look at ourselves. We need to look at our families, our businesses, how we are functioning at a time like this. As Richard said, we were perfectly placed to enter this world of complete stress overload already. COVID not helping that at all. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for. Richard Sutton, thank you for taking the time to speak to us. It's really been a fascinating conversation. I have a lot to take away from it, which means no doubt other people do as well. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just to click subscribe below so that you don't miss out on any of these podcasts. I'm Howard Feldman. This is the Synthesis Podcast. Richard Sutton, thank you.
Thank you so much.